Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Amma ba'd, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Jazakumullah khairan for the honor of being here at IlmFest. SubhanAllah, I've been telling all of the volunteers that I grew up in New York, and so I'm part of almost the original Qabila Taiba crew. And I remember being a volunteer for IlmFest I won't tell you how many years ago, but the last time that IlmFest was in New York. And it was amazing, subhanAllah. And now to be on the receiving end of the hospitality of the volunteers here is wonderful. So please keep the volunteers in your dua, because the efforts that they have to put forth to make this a reality is really intense. It took hours upon hours, weeks upon weeks, months. And so keep them in your dua. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward them for every single bit of their effort. Ameen. I'm also really honored to speak about this particular topic. It's very near and dear to my heart, which is, why do bad things happen to me? I work as a mental health therapist, alhamdulillah, and when clients walk into my office, they're often at some of the darkest, lowest points in their lives, and they're really struggling. So some of them might be struggling with miscarriage, for example, having lost a pregnancy, having lost a child they hoped they would have. Some of them may have been dealing with abuse from people that they should have been able to trust. Some are dealing with debilitating anxiety, with debilitating depression. And what happens with every struggle that we undergo in our lives is that every single struggle is a form of loss. There are times when loss can be tangible, right? The loss of a pregnancy, for example, failing an exam, right? It's something tangible. But then every single struggle we go through also has a different type of loss associated with it. And that loss is the loss of what you thought your life would look like if you still had it. That suddenly the dream that you had nurtured for so long is no longer a reality. And that's what's really difficult for people to bear, that loss. And in the grief that we go through as we endure it, sometimes what happens is that doubts arise. Thoughts come into our minds that are really negative about the world, about the people in it, and sometimes even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our relationship with Him. So thoughts that we're going to try to address today are things like, if I'm struggling with these thoughts, then that must mean I have weak iman. If I'm struggling with these thoughts, then there's something wrong with me. I must be a bad person. These thoughts mean that I am doubtful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of His power. Why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punish me in this way? If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loved me, then He would give me good. He wouldn't be giving me these punishments. And it seems like whatever I do, however much I try, however much I pray, nothing is going right. What's the point anymore? I'm feeling hopeless. So a lot of my clients come in and they struggle with these thoughts. And a lot of you sitting here probably struggle with them as well. And then there are probably some of you who are sitting here and you're thinking to yourself, astaghfirullah, I don't know how anybody could think these things, right? So let me just say, for those of you who are struggling with these thoughts, you're not alone in struggling with them, and we're going to break them down, inshallah. And for those of you who are not struggling with these thoughts, thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. Pray that that's not going to be one of the struggles that you endure, but also keep in mind that these thoughts or the lack of these thoughts do not indicate whether a person is good or bad, whether a person's iman is high or low, okay? And that's the first misconception that we're going to address. That if I'm experiencing these thoughts, then I must be weak in my faith. That there must be something wrong in my connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, in response to that, I ask you a question. If that were true, then wouldn't that mean that no one righteous has ever experienced these types of thoughts. And that nobody righteous has ever struggled in their connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has ever struggled with negative thoughts. Okay. So if that were true, then consider this hadith, where the companions of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they came to him and they said, we find in ourselves thoughts that are too terrible to speak of. And he said, do you really experience this? And they said, yes. And what did he respond? Did he respond, astaghfirullah, make wudu, go pray 2 rak'ahs, and things like that? No. Instead, he said, verily, this is a sign of clear faith. If our righteous predecessors, some of the best people to ever walk on earth, experienced thoughts that were so bad that they couldn't speak of them out loud, then why do we expect that we're better and we won't experience them? We question, when the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that this is a sign of clear faith, we question, how could that be a possibility, right? I feel further from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when I experience these doubts, when I experience these thoughts. So how can this be a sign of clear faith? Imam al-Nawawi, rahimahullah, in his commentary about this hadith, he said that the fact that you hate these thoughts, the fact that your heart recoils against these thoughts, the fact that you feel guilty about these thoughts, that's the sign of clear faith. You don't want them. You don't want these thoughts. And they are a trick of shaitan. If you've ever heard the term waswasa, the whispering of shaitan, these thoughts come from that. And it is one of his attempts to deteriorate and weaken our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And who does he try to tempt in that way? Does he bother with the people who don't do anything to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? No, he comes at the people who are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because those are the connections he wants to weaken. Those are the victories for him, right? And so that's why when we dislike them and we fight against them, that is a mark of clear faith. Another thing that we might struggle with these thoughts is the idea that if I'm having these thoughts, there's something wrong with me. It means I'm a bad person. It means that because I have these thoughts determine who I am. Shaitan's mission in life is to break our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So imagine him, he's trying to steal your connection with Allah in the same way that in your home you likely pay for Wi-Fi service, right? And imagine if your neighbor next door started to steal it. He's just like, I'm not gonna pay. There's plenty of Wi-Fi here for everybody to share. He tries to take some of your Wi-Fi service. And then you suddenly notice that your download and upload speeds are not quite as quick as they used to be. And you realize that that he's stealing your Wi-Fi service. So in the same way, shaitan is trying to steal our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so when we try to protect ourselves against the shaitan, it's the same way that we try to protect our Wi-Fi against people who are going to try and steal it. We password protect it. The Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a man came to him and he said, O Messenger of Allah, I think thoughts to myself which I would rather be burnt to a cinder than speak of them. And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam responded, praise be to Allah who has reduced all of shaitan's plots to mere whispers. In response to a man saying he struggled with these thoughts, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, praise to Allah. And so the power of our thoughts are what we choose them to be. Our thoughts don't determine who we are. They don't determine our choices. We have the power to choose how to respond to those thoughts, and we can choose to reduce them to mere whispers, as the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam says. Just like we can allow somebody to steal our Wi-Fi and whine about it, right? Or we can password protect our Wi-Fi. We can password protect our hearts and our minds against shaitan as well. And so the way that we empower ourselves to disempower shaitan is by doing the exact opposite of what he strives to push us toward. He strives to disconnect us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so we try to connect with him. During our struggles is when the shaitan is going to come and he's going to tell us, this is an example of why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't love you. Do you see how Allah doesn't care for you? Do you see he doesn't give you what you need? Because that's when you're at your most vulnerable, and that's when he's going to try to get you, right? But we refuse to submit to shaitan, and instead we choose to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's explore approaches and questions we can ask ourselves to build up these internal passwords to protect ourselves against shaitan's whispers. So something that people might think is that these thoughts, if I'm having these doubtful thoughts, then that means that I doubt Allah. But not necessarily, right? Passing thoughts don't determine, like we said, who we are, right? They're just thoughts. And just like anything else that causes us to struggle, that causes us discomfort, there's an opportunity to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there's an opportunity to gain rewards. So they don't mean anything unless we choose to give them meaning. Consider the story of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. In the Quran, he says that Ibrahim alayhi salam says, "My Lord, show me how you give life to the dead." And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Have you not believed? Are you doubting me?" And he says, "I have believed, yes, but I ask only so that my heart may be satisfied, that I might strengthen my faith." And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him to take 4 birds, to slaughter them, to put them on different hills, call them to him, and then they come back flying. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ends and he says, "And know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is exalted in might, al-Aziz, and wise, al-Hakim." The Prophet ﷺ, with regards to this ayah, he says that we're more likely to doubt than Ibrahim alayhi salam. And Ibn Hajar, in his commentary about this hadith, he says that, meaning if doubt could have possibly approached Ibrahim, then we are a lot more susceptible to it. But realize that Ibrahim alayhi salam was a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Questions coming through our minds, seeking answers does not mean that we doubt Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so now that we've established that struggling with these thoughts is a lot more common than people tend to expect, and that they're not an indication of our level of iman or connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then how do we respond to them? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded to Ibrahim alayhi salam by giving him the evidence he asked for, but then he gives us something at the end of these ayat to nurture our hearts and our minds, where he reminds us that, and know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Aziz, Al-Hakim. Al-Aziz, the Almighty, the one exalted in might, the one who has complete mastery over all creation, the one who overcomes everything, the one who is incomparable and unparalleled, the one who is cherished and a source of all strength and power. And Al-Hakim, the most wise, the one who is most knowing, the one who has perfect wisdom, the one who acts with perfect knowledge and comprehension of everything that's apparent and hidden, knowledge without end, knowledge of what you are going through at this moment, what you are feeling at this moment, the one who does the proper thing at the proper time, in the proper place and in the proper way. That is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so let's explore through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's might and his wisdom further evidence to alleviate any doubt we might have when we're experiencing struggles. The idea that a lot of people hold is that good and bad comes to those who are deserving of reward and punishment. Meaning good and bad in this life comes to those who are deserving of reward and punishment. That every time something bad happens, it means that you did something bad and that's why you got it, right? When bad things happen to us, as human beings, we have a natural tendency to search for meaning. We want to understand why things are happening. We pick interpretations that fit into our view of what the world is like, what we expect from the world. But the problem is that when we're going through a struggle, especially something that's traumatic, our brains change in a way that shifts our lens to be a lot more negative, a lot more unrealistic, a lot more fearful and pessimistic. And this lens can even go so far as to impact our view of the world, the people, and even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our relationship with him. And so suddenly these thoughts like, I must be a bad person to be experiencing what I'm experiencing right now, can come to mind. When things don't turn out the way we want them to, we always think, if only, right? And the Rasul ﷺ says that this phrase, if only, opens the door to shaitan. Because you think, if only I had done this, or if only my life was like this, then I would have a happier ending. And so it's tempting to assume that our lives are based on cause and effect, that there's a direct cause and there's a direct effect, and that you're going to see that direct consequence for your actions. And so we have this assumption that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives good to those who do good in this world and only gives hardships to those who deserve to suffer, right? But in reality, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell us? He tells us that He tests those who He loves. And He tells us that times of good and ease and times of hardship and trials are both tests, and they both have their own blessings within them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that, and as for man, when his Lord tries him and is generous to him and favors him, meaning that when we are tested with ease, right? Then the person says, my Lord has honored me. But when he tries him, meaning he tests him, and he restricts his provision, meaning he takes away something, he tests him in a difficult way, then the person will say, my Lord has humiliated me. So when something good happens, we feel honored by Allah. When something bad happens, we feel humiliated by Allah. And immediately following this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Kalla. No. He's saying that our rationale is not correct in this situation. So instead, let's view it through the lens of Allah as Al-Aziz Al-Hakim, through His might and His wisdom. That part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being Al-Aziz is that He's also Al-Mu'izz, meaning the one who grants izzah, the one who grants honor, dignity, power, strength, which is the opposite of humiliation. Sometimes when we're going through hardships, we feel humiliated because we feel weak and vulnerable. But what if these hardships are actually a way and a means for Al-Aziz to provide us with izzah, to provide us with strength, to provide us with honor, to provide us with dignity? One of the reasons that I love the work that I do so much is because my clients, some of them have just suffered they've survived the insurvivable, subhanAllah. And they come through after dealing with so much hardship and so much hopelessness, they come through with degrees of qualities that you don't see anywhere else. Their compassion, their empathy, their strength, their patience, all of these amazing qualities, somebody who's led a life of only ease can't fathom how much these people experience in the qualities that they then have. And it comes definitely at a price, but it is such an honor to work with them and to witness it, subhanAllah. And so we imagine that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is punishing us when we go through hardships, right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants ill for us. These are the things shaitan whispers into our minds, into our ears. That we've worshipped him for years and we haven't gotten what we wanted. We've been denied it over and over. And that all we're getting is pain. But what we forget is that literally within our lives, there are examples, simple examples of when pain equals gain, right? When you exercise and you deal with the pain of exercise and you yield a healthier body and mind. When you study for an exam painfully and you feel prepared and you're successful at your exam. Hardships differentiate us. They help us to grow, they help us to progress, they help us to move forward. Sometimes we see this progression in the dunya and sometimes we see it in the akhirah. But regardless, ask yourself, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala truly wanted to harm you through these struggles, then why would there be such a tremendous reward for what you're going through? For example, if you've lost somebody, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam talks about how that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that I have no reward except for Jannah for a believing slave of mine who shows patience and anticipates my reward after the death of somebody that they love. Somebody suffers a miscarriage and that child will drag their parents away from the hellfire toward Jannah because of the pain that they've suffered. If you feel like somebody has treated you with injustice or you've been oppressed, remember that the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that the supplication of 3 people are responded to and never turned away. And one of those is somebody who is oppressed, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raises it above the clouds, the gates of heaven are open for it, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, by my might, I will help you in due time. That no fatigue, nor disease, nor sorrow, nor sadness, nor hurt, nor distress befalls a Muslim, even if it were the prick of a thorn, but that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala relieves some of his sins from him. That's what the Rasul said. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised that he's going to give good tidings to the patient through their tests, as we bear our tests. They don't really sound like punishments, right? With hardships, the reward that comes, it doesn't sound like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is punishing us. The last thought that we talked about was the idea that I try, I pray, I do everything, and still I'm not getting what I'm asking for. It's hopeless. And we know the hadith of Rasulullah that dua can be accepted in 3 different ways, right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can prevent something worse, something from happening to you, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants you what you want, or that He saves it for you in the akhirah. But I want to delve into it a little bit more, where people sometimes feel betrayed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That I've sought this and I haven't gotten it. I've done everything you asked me and it's not happening, right? And so people feel betrayed, that, or somebody who's gone through hardships with somebody in their life, that they've been hurt, that they've been abused, that they have been humiliated by someone, and they ask, why didn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stop it? I feel betrayed by Allah. It can be really hard at those points to wrap our minds around the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا, that indeed with hardship comes ease. And one of the pitfalls that we often fall into is that instead of being angry at the situation, which we're allowed to be angry when things happen, right? When somebody's unjust toward us. Instead of being angry at the situation or at a person who's hurt us, instead we transfer that anger to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A lot of times it feels a lot safer, right? Somebody's hurting you, bullying you, abusing you. It's not that safe to show anger toward them. But the problem with this is that it creates this barrier, this shield between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during the time when we need Him most, right? When we need the comforts of our deen, when we need the comfort and nurturance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, now we have this barrier of anger that we can no longer get that from Him, right? But recognizing anger at a situation, right, that it's difficult, that it's hurtful, it allows ourselves to experience the difficult emotions, discharge them, right, without blocking ourselves from the comfort of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It wasn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who betrayed you. It was a person who betrayed you. And this is part and parcel of being a human being. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants each of us free will. That we have the free will to do good or to do bad. To make choices that hurt people or to make choices that help people. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had bound us to only good choices, then we wouldn't be free. It would not be free will, right? And so with this free will comes the pain and comes the hurt and comes the fact that sometimes good people get hurt. And because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't stop it, does it mean that He approves of it, that He likes it? Of course not, right? Because if that were the case, then there wouldn't be judgment on Judgment Day. When the Day of Judgment comes, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala approved of everything, then would we be facing judgment? Would we be risking the displeasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? We tend to jump to conclusions about why certain tests were sent our way. But in this process, we unintentionally try to think that we're capable of knowing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually thinking. But remember that one of the facets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names that we discuss, Al-Aziz, is that He's beyond comparison, that He is unparalleled, that we can't compare our rationale to that of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that He's Al-Hakim, the one who has perfect knowledge, who acts with perfect knowledge and comprehension of everything. If any of you have ever tried to bake a cake with a recipe, right? There are times that it comes out fine, and then there are times that it just doesn't. And you have the recipe we have the recipe in our hands. So if we can't even, with a piece of paper giving us direct instructions, yield a perfect cake with a recipe in our hands, then why do we expect that we're going to have this infinite, perfect master of an understanding of every facet of the universe, or even every facet of ourselves, right? Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he used to say, "Oh Allah, you know me more than I know myself." The difference between Allah's knowledge and human knowledge is that we have to acquire our knowledge. We acquire it based on learning, on experience, on books, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need to do that. His knowledge is infinite. It has no beginning and no end. It's not based on trial and error. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, "And with him are the keys of the unseen. None knows them except him. And he knows what is on land and in the sea. Not a leaf falls, but that he knows it. And no grain is there within darknesses of the earth, no moist or dry thing, but that it is written in a clear record." If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the all-knowing, the almighty, the wise, tells us that both times of good and times of hardships are tests, and each of them have their blessings, then why would we think that our rationale about it is better than his? So in conclusion, we focused on the potential answers to the question, why do bad things happen to me? Which can equip us to fight shaitan's temptations, his attempt to break our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But one of the most powerful passwords that we can possess, you know, the kind that the website suggests, where you have all the weird symbols, the numbers, all the capital letters and things like that, those really strong passwords. One of the strongest passwords that we can possess to protect our minds and our hearts from shaitan's waswasa is shifting our question from, why do bad things happen to me? Why did this happen to me? To, now that it's happened, how will I move forward? Our responses, not the circumstances, dictate our lives and how we choose to nurture our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember when the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam was driven out of Mecca by the Quraysh? He accepted the fact that this was happening, and then he did his part to make an effort to move away, where he went out in the evening time. He had Ali radiallahu anhu take his place as a decoy in his bed, right? And then when he and Abu Bakr were in a cave hiding from Quraysh, he did his part to overcome the struggle. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, if you do not aid the Prophet, Allah has already aided him. When they were in the cave and he said to his companion, do not grieve, indeed Allah is with us. And Allah sent down his tranquility upon him and supported him with angels. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ends this ayah by saying, and Allah is Al-Aziz, the exalted in might, and Al-Hakim, the wise. So when it seems like the world is filled with darkness and fears, remember what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us here. He tells us that He will aid us even if the world does not. That He is with us even when we feel alone. And that through His might and His wisdom, we'll find our strength, our clarity, our honor, and our certainty, inshallah. Jazakumullahu khairan. Subhanakallah wa hamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.